Hello, it is July, and the lonely Trllp read-along became much more lonely because Steve Donahue, as is his right, decided to take a little bit of a break and do a read-along of James Boswell's The Life of Johnson, which I've read before. I finally finished reading it in 2017. Highly recommended it. They're going to read it over the month of July. I read it over a course of many years, just sort of coming back to it every once in a while, reading a couple of pages and coming back to it. They are doing like 225 pages a week, which has probably got its benefits to it. And I'll probably tune into those talks that he'll inevitably host and listen, because he'll probably bring a lot to it that I completely missed. He was just talking about a little section earlier as just sort of a teaser, and it was like, oh yeah, okay, you can see the multi layers and stuff like that, and it was that'll be interesting. However, so I am not doing that. So I am decided I'm going to read some short stories of Trllp, and he's got a collection called The Editor's Tales. I think it was published in like 1870, and it's just a collection. Found it on LibriVox, so I'm just sort of going to listen to them. I think there's like 6 stories that I'll knock off during the month of July. Just sort of listen to them, think about them. First one I'm doing is the one I'm going to do today very briefly, is the Turkish Bath. Now, I think with these stories, they are short stories. It's kind of hard to just talk about them without spoiling them. So if you're interested in reading this or listening to this beforehand, go to LibriVox, go to Gutenberg. You can find free copies of it and stuff like that. So let's get on with it. So yes, The Editor's Tales, and this is the Turkish Bath. And the first story is an editor who refers to himself as in the we, which, editors often, when they're discoursing in their publications, they use the royal or the editor we in those conversations. And he talks about going to a Turkish bath, and it's like, wow, it's a thing where everybody gets basically naked except for like a towel around them, and he meets this fellow who it's like, and they strike up a conversation, which is like one of these things of usually gentlemen don't talk to each other. Talking to each other in the Turkish bath, you should do it in a quiet voice, very quiet voice. You don't want to disturb the kind of exotic, it's very exoticized kind of Turkish bath stuff. But also it's like, well, oh, we haven't been introduced, but and he was like, oh, should I say something to the guy? But then the guy talks to him, and it's like, oh, the guy is I think he sounds a little Irish, and indeed he is Irish, Michael Malloy. And he seems like he's like holds himself very kind of regally, kind of man of the world, makes some allusions to various things, and having kind of gone all over the world and stuff like that. And he says, oh yeah, that's nice, and it wraps up the conversation with, oh, and would you be I've got a manuscript for you to look at to place in your magazine. And he says the name of the editor, and it's like, how did you know my name? It's like, oh, this has obviously been a ruse from the beginning. He's trailed me, and actually he then realizes as he comes out of the bath and he finally does meet the guy, that the guy was a shabbily dressed guy that he saw on the street, but he didn't recognize him with just a towel and his kind of regal, kind of man of the world bearing. It's just like, and they go to he goes to the thing, and he convinces them, just read my manuscript. And it's like, okay, fine, yeah, I'll read your, like, but I've got a very poor family. My wife's not doing very well. It's like, okay, here's the sovereign, and he thinks, okay, most likely I'm never going to see him again. I'll read the manuscript. He reads the manuscript. The manuscript is horrendous. He says, I can't imagine anyone would. And the guy at Mike Malloy had claimed that he'd like written for all these different things. It's like, oh, okay, this is obviously just a scam. And I'll never see my sovereign again. That's fine, whatever. I kind of like the guy. He's like, I'm charmed by him. But the guy, Michael Malloy, shows up again, and is like, and seems to be all expectation, like, oh, did you like it? Did you like it? And it's like, no, I didn't like it. It was not, and basically it's like kind of brass tack. It's not a good story. It's like, well, but my family, and he kind of weeps and he cries and he thinks, it's like, and it's like, look, it's like, let me bring you another manuscript. And it's like, he gives him another sovereign. He goes away. he finally does come back in like a week's time with like a gigantic manuscript. He's like, that you probably didn't do that, but you know, he reads the first page of it and it's more of the same, just complete utter utter crap. And it's like, you know, in the end, and he's talks about like, you know, but it's like he's poverty and all that, and it's like, so like, well, you know, maybe I should let me come and see your family, because he's starting to really kind of develop a fondness for the fellow. But he's like, and the guy's like, oh, and he wonders like, well, okay, is this just all trickery? It's like, you're not, this is all scam. You don't have a family, you don't have a sick wife. But yeah, so okay, fine, you can come, but come after 7. Come after 7. So he comes after 7, and he finds himself not in a slum, which is what he was expecting, but in a rather, you know, fairly kind of like, you know, tradesman kind of level. It's like, you know, it's a little dingy, but it's tradesman. It's fairly respectable. And there's Malloy when he knocks. Someone calls, and he walks in, and there's Malloy with little daughter on his daughter's lap, and he's smiling away kind of winningly, like a little twinkle in his eye. And it's like, you know, it's like, oh, and my, you know, and the little girl's like, oh, mama hasn't come back from the hospital yet. She'll be back shortly. She's usually back at this time. It's like, usually if someone's sick, they don't regularly just get to come home at the end of the day. That's not how it goes. And it turns out, no, Malloy's wife is a nurse at the hospital, makes a good living. And she's like, says, come with me. And she explains the situation to him. Malloy is insane. He's mad. He does this to all sorts of people. He's, you know, yeah, I make a good living. He actually has he comes from a good family. He gets a pension every year. We're not hurting for funds. And as she's telling him this, she takes out the sovereign and gives it back to him. And, yeah. And it's like, but he goes around, it's like, well, how does he get like the funds for the paper? It's like, well, actually there's some newspapers that like, you know, give him paper and stuff like that. And it's like, you know, and they humor him. And at the end of the story, it's like the editor's like, oh, actually he is kind of this nice, kind of fun guy, charming guy. And it's like, he says like, and, you know, basically we started giving him paper too. And so that's how the Turkish Bath story of like kind of looking at someone from a certain like, you know, they hold themselves a certain way. And it's like, how much of that, you know, without the trappings on, you can just present and you can conjure, with just a simple blue check towel around you. Where when you start investigating the story and they put the clothes on and you investigate where they live and the family, you get a whole different, completely different story of basically someone who is mad, who's not in their full faculties. So yeah, it's kind of a charming little story to start off my very lonely my short Trllp read along. You know, it'll be interesting to see how Trllp does in kind of a little bit more compressed. I mean, these aren't short stories, but you know, not the big 3 double triple decker novels that he writes. This is just concentrated little stories on there, it seems. So yeah, that's the first one. We shall see how it goes.